in territory.
So we were on Hebrews chapter 7, somewhere in the middle, I think. We were talking about, well, I'll just read verse 12. Since there was a change in the priesthood, so also there was a change in the law. For he concerning whom these things are spoken was born of another tribe from which no man ever ministered at the altar. For it is evident that our Lord sprang out of Judah, of which tribe Moses said nothing concerning the priesthood. So what had we been talking about on those verses? I think it's just saying that Yeshua's priesthood is not from Levi, I think is the main. But verse 12, he says, since there was a change in the priesthood, so also there was a change in the law. So the change in the law would have been back when back in David's day, Psalm 110, when he's talking about because that's in verse 11, it's mentioning, if therefore perfection had been reached by the Levitical priesthood by which the law was enacted for the people, what further need was there that another priest should rise after the order of Melchizedek? Otherwise, the scriptures, Psalm 110, would have said that he would have been after the order of Aaron. So at that point, I think the author is saying there was a change in the law as far as the law that was enacted for the people. I think that little enacted for the people. I think it kind of shows you what the temple era was for. Go ahead, Kay.
Now, I have a question because you mentioned probably it was changed back to David's time because it quoted Psalm 110. So I guess my question is, what was the law during David's time that it was referring to?
The law that was enacted for the people, that the author is referencing to it.
And what?
Talking to everything after the golden calf.
So that was David's time was during the Levitical priesthood, right?
First temple era. Before the actual physical structure was made. They didn't have the temple.
But they had a tabernacle and they had the Aaronic priesthood in place.
Yeah. So I guess it was more, it wasn't the permanent structure. So what do you know about that, Carrie? I know that they had the tentative meeting that they were moving around. Then they went into the land. You know of the history of what they were doing prior to. I know that they were taking the ark around. It was they moved it in a cart and so forth. They weren't supposed to, but they did that. They're supposed to carry it. What do you know about that, Carrie?
Well, I mean, they had a place for the Ark of the Covenant to be. I guess I'm not understanding your question as far as
what was the temple? I mean, I remember it ended up on a threshing floor somewhere in a granary or something.
Where was the tabernacle, you mean?
Yeah, the Ark of the Covenant.
Well, while David reigned, I'm trying to think, it was brought back. I'd have to look at it.
The Philistines had it for a while, and it ended up at some guy's house in his granary.
Right, but then it ended up coming back.
Yeah.
I'm not sure where it was situated.
I don't know either.
But at any rate, even before my point would be not to get it so much into that. I do want to study that more. I haven't really looked at it. But the greater point is that even before the temple was built, David was prophesying that there's a change in the law. I'm going to read this verse again, and I'm going to just focus on the one part. If therefore perfection had been reached by the Levitical priesthood, by which the law was enacted for the people. What does anybody else's version say for that? I think that this law was enacted for the covenant breakers. I think we can take that out of what the author is saying. Does that, you got a different translation? I was in 11. I was in verse 7:11. Sorry about that. By which the law was enacted for the people. When I read that, I just picture the second set of commandments after the golden calf. It was enacted because of the covenant being broken.
I think I see what you're saying. In the Young's literal translation, it says, "If indeed then."
Go ahead and turn on your video.
Okay. The Young's literal translation reads, verse 11, "If indeed then perfection were through the Levitical priesthood," and the word perfection there is teleosis, a completing or a perfecting, were through the Levitical priesthood, for the people under it had received law. What further need, according to the order of Melchizedek, for another priest to arise and not to be called according to the order of Aaron? So I think I see what you're saying, Ty, that the Levitical priesthood with that came instructions concerning Levitical law. And it seems that the author of Hebrews is saying if a completing or a perfecting was to happen through this priesthood, then why at the time of David that you're referring to in the Psalm, is there a reference to the order of Melchizedek that another priest should arise as opposed to the order of Aaron?
Yes, that's what I think the author is saying.
Okay, so I'm just presenting another verse, and I think I see what you're saying.
What does the scriptures version say, Kay?
I'm trying to compare it with the Bible Hub, the Greek. It seems like it says, "Truly then, if perfection were through the Levitical priesthood, for under it the people were given the Torah." The word the article the is not in the Greek. It's in parentheses. So it's like, for under it the people were given instructions. So I don't know if that's significant. Why was there still need for another priest to arise according to the order of Melchizedek, and not to be called according to the order of Aharon? So, because we're always thinking like the Torah, you know, like a definite, like pointing to something. I mean, Torah is just instructions. So there are sets of instructions everywhere.
Well, I think that the Torah that really matters is the first one. That was the original intent. Then there was a breaking of the covenant, the golden calf. There was adjustments made. Another 40 days up on the mountain, Moses brought down a different set of instructions. And I think it was for the people to learn. It was supposed to be a teaching tool to help them learn what the initial Torah would have been. Because when Paul calls it a schoolmaster or a tutor, all of that kind of lends the idea that all of the Levitical stuff is supposed to be teaching us. But it's not the end goal. The end goal of the Aaronic, the Levitical, the end goal was not perfection. I think that the end goal of the Melchizedek type priest that lives forever, that's where the sons are born. That's the goal of the Torah, the law. So we have this dichotomy. And this is a part of Hebrews that people go crazy on. And I think it's important to understand what law is being talked about. And I'm more than open to all ideas on this. I'm just kind of telling you my take on it. I'm not saying that's the way it is. That's the way I think it is. That's two different things. So it seems like he's putting down the preeminence of the Aaronic priesthood. It seems like the author is like talking down Aaron a little bit here. So does that make anybody uncomfortable? Anybody want to have a comment on that? I mean, this is a big idea, really.
When you say the first Torah, what exactly do you mean? Just to clarify.
The ones that got put inside the Ark of the Covenant, the ones that got smashed, because the second set was never put inside. I think that the original set was different than the second set. I think the second set, there was no Levites in the first set. The Levites invented after they, he crushed made him drink the bitter water or whatever and all that stuff. And then he drew a line in the sand and the Levites stepped across the line and said, we're on the side of the Most High. That all happened after the golden calf. That was after the Torah was given. So it's a different, I don't know, I got lost. What was the question?
No, so you're pertaining to the Book of the Covenant.
Okay.
Not the Book of the Torah, because there is a distinction in Scripture.
Okay, that might be a good way to put it.
Yes, and the Book of the Torah was placed outside the ark as a witness against them, their disobedience.
Go ahead, Michael.
No, this is good stuff. It's this. People argue against they call it the Torah and the covenant doctrine, but when you look at it in the scriptures, there's really no denying it. That is what it is.
Yeah.
There were instructions before the golden calf. Well, even go back further than that. There were instructions before the falling away, and then something changed, right? They were cast out of the garden. No longer would it produce food for them. They couldn't have paradise anymore. They had to go do their own stuff. So there was the first change, right? And then, however many hundreds of years pass by, and then they find themselves being marched out of slavery, out of bondage, to a place where they're going to enter back into covenant with the Father, and yet they do it again, they mess up, and then bam, there's another change. So it's always the people who invoke the change, right? And the Father, wanting to be close to the people, always offering a way back. But it's not instant. It's not instant. We're here we are generations later, and then the Messiah showed up at the doorstep of the temple, right? He shows up and he's teaching people, back to the ancient path, which Scripture says we're supposed to seek. And he's teaching that, and they're like, wait a minute, you can't surpass the temple. You can't go around the temple and get to the Father. And he's like doing miracles in the Father's name, and they're seeing it, and they're like, what does this man have? What is he's gonna be the ruin of us. We better get rid of him. It's better that one man die than the whole religion. So they killed him. All right, but they still couldn't kill the power of the Father. They can't kill that. And so he rose back up. And guess what? That was another change. So that wasn't the only change. When you look back at history, there's several changes that happened from Genesis 1 all the way to now. And people have a problem with the book of Hebrews talking about a change in the law. But this change with the Messiah was not the first change. It was not. So when we look at it, when I look at it from that perspective, it's a little bit easier to digest. And it's almost like man, I can't believe that I thought for so long, oh, he doesn't change. Well, yeah, he changes. His method changes, but his end goal does never change. His purpose remains the same. And the only reason that his method has to change is because we have free will and we don't always make the right choice. So he has to accommodate, or he doesn't have to. He wants to accommodate us to give us another chance and another chance and another chance. And when are we going to wake up, McFly, and do it? And so that's kind of where I'm at with all this. And this Hebrews thing, this chapter 11, or I'm sorry, I should be in chapter 7. Chapter 7 in Peshitta, verse 11. If therefore perfection had been reached by the Levitical priesthood, by which the law was enacted for the people. Now that first verse right there, before the comma that probably wasn't in the original, the law was enacted for the people. Well, why do you think the law was enacted for the people? If not to bring the people back to the original intent of creation. See, people are physical. We need to see things, especially men. We have to see something. I can read it in a book, but unless I see it, unless I drive there myself, I'm not going to remember the way. So I have to see it. So this is why the law was enacted for the people, so they could go through the motions and understand and learn and get the message. What further need was there that another priest should rise after the order of Melchizedek? If that was all there was, then what would be the point of another priest? If that was all there was, or another priesthood even. So and the point I think that Ty's making is, if you go back to the beginning, that priesthood didn't even exist. So where did it come from? Why did it spew up out of the earth? What happened?
Well, Michael, you're talking about changes. Levites were a change.
Yeah, they were a big change.
That was not part of the original Torah.
No, it's like childproofing your kitchen.
And you remember what the Most High said to Moses? To go back down the mountain because his people, Moses' people, are sinning.
Yeah.
He was like, they're no longer his people. The Most High, the covenant had already been broken. So what if the Levites were enacted for Aaron and all of that? That was for Moses' people.
I feel like the whole Levitical priesthood system is kind of like child-proofing your house, right? It's trying to help the people to do better.
I like that, Michael.
Yeah, it's helping the people to do better and watching them to see if they're going to do right. And every little bit, every little level you get through, one of the little child safety locks comes off and you get to shock yourself a couple times.
So what if as you grow, you're like, oh no, my dad put these child locks on these cabinets. We're leaving them on there forever and you can't take them off because that's what my father wanted me to do. It's taking a thing and applying it wrong. No, you were supposed to take the child locks off later when you grew up. You don't need them anymore.
Yep.
They made a religion out of the child locks.
Because when I was a child, I behaved as a child. But when I became a man, I behaved as a man. No longer needing child locks. Because the child locks are in my heart, Ty. But anyway, that's kind of what I'm thinking with all this stuff. Yep. So Aaron, that was just, in my opinion, the entire Levitical priesthood was established because the people had proven that they could not or would not, as a group, follow the right path. And so they were...
Even going back, though, Michael, Aaron was established because Moses needed a mouthpiece.
Yeah.
It wasn't even... Aaron wasn't even part of the original idea. That was a change.
Yep. Oh, we've awakened, Matt.
I had a comment about, I used to think that all of the attention about the change in the priesthood came in Yeshua's day, like that the Hebrews was talking about, now the change is happening. But with the study that we've been doing, my attention is being drawn back to David's day, because it's in the Psalms that this is talked about. So like what Ty is saying, even before Solomon's temple was built, this idea was put forth. It was prophesied through David, essentially. And so this was not like out of left field. I mean, they knew, the people in that day would have been aware. They may not have understood it completely, but they would have been aware that there's a different game in town besides the Levitical priesthood that they were dealing with at the time. Back then, back then. So anyway, that was a big aha moment for me.
David is a very special prophet. I don't think people consider him to be the prophet generally that he really is. Looking at, and Yeshua quoted him quite a bit to confound the Pharisees in like Matthew 23, 24, whatever. They didn't understand how he could be the son of David and begotten of the Spirit. This is the thing with David. His line, Yeshua, he gave us the Spirit later. This was another change. Michael was talking about changes. This everlasting priesthood is the one that counts, the one that's like Melchizedek. I don't think it is actually called the Melchizedek priesthood. I think it's like it. It's unto it. It's a way to understand it. It was the preeminent priesthood, the one that the Most High wanted, the one that, this is the real anointing. This is where the anointed sons come into play. It's a big idea. Anyway, go ahead, George.
I don't have anything to add other than this is really fascinating, and it seems to be really clarifying a whole lot of things. I'm digging it. That's all I mean.
Thanks, George. Anson, did you have any comments on it?
I'll just ask what Kay wrote here. Like, what makes us think that we're capable or we're mature enough to forego the tutor and take off the child lock? Yeah, because it's a good point that Kay wrote there. The Hebrew Roots movement has been using this,
Yes.
to hold on to the Torah.
Not just the Hebrew Roots movement, all of them. Really, I keep hearing Messiah saying, you hold people back, you don't go in, and you keep people from going in. You're holding people back. The opposite of you're supposed to be showing the Father to these people. Your rules and laws are actually blocking them and holding them, keeping them from going and reaching where they're supposed to be. I keep hearing that. And other voices too, but I won't get in. I'm just kidding.
Yes, and what we're discussing here right now, it does sound very similar to the beliefs that we used to have when we were in churchianity, and so so how do we deal with that issue or contention?
Churchianity doesn't have any answers. We asked the questions and they didn't have the answers. If we've gone through the whole ride and we're coming back around to that theology again, but now we have the answers that they never did. And I think the whole thing we're talking about is milk and meat. And I think the meat is spiritual growth. I'm not against Torah at all. I'm the middle Torah, whatever you want to call it, the Levitical Torah. Yes, but I don't want to make a whole thing out of it. I want to learn from it. That was his primary goal, was to teach me what the primary goal was. It's like, it's not the teaching tool, it's not the primary thing. the whole religion of making well, the religion, the thing that we have to do this and not change. You see what that looks like. We see with the people denying the Messiah. It's like you're missing it. The whole goal is the Messiah. The tell of the Torah is the Messiah. The son of David, the anointing, the anointed sons. It's not about the Aaronic priesthood. It's not about keeping the feast. That's all to teach you what it's like.
Yeah.
Keep it anyway. Where are you keeping it? I talk to these Torah people. I'm like, you can't keep it. You're full of it. There's no way you can do it. You don't even have a daily offering. You don't have an altar. You don't have a priest. You're not keeping anything. You're delusional. Go ahead.
Hold on there, dear.
You've got to get mad. Listen, this is something that I really think I need to read. It's very relative to this topic that we're on in Hebrews, and Tremaine just brought it to my attention, so it has to be important. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, from this perspective, okay? Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, and have not love in my heart, I am become as sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy, and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith, so that I could remove mountains, and have not love in my heart, I am nothing. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned, and have not love in my heart, I gain nothing. Love is long-suffering and kind. Love does not envy. Love does not make a vain display of itself, and does not boast, does not behave itself unseemly, seeks not its own, is not easily provoked, thinks no evil, rejoices not over iniquity, but rejoices in the truth, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails, but whether there be prophecies, they shall fail. Whether there be tongues, they shall cease. Whether there be knowledge, it shall vanish away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when that which is perfect is come, then that which is imperfect shall come to an end. When I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. For now we see through a mirror darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I shall know, even as also I am known. And now I abide faith, hope, love, these three, but the greatest of these is love. Now, I made a comment about behaving as a child and all that, and then she heard me in the other room, and then she came out here, she said, you got to read the whole chapter. And then bam, that's I believe now what he's talking about here is what we're talking about now. So, yeah.
Good stuff, Michael. Thank you.
Hallelujah.
I apologize for getting heated up, but I'm all about reading comprehension. If you're going to keep the Torah, let's do it precept upon precept, line on line. Let's just read it and do it. And we can't. And why is that? What are we waiting for? We have the Spirit. We have the Spirit. And the goal of it all is love. Okay? We love each other. We love our Father. And how do we do that? And, you know, clinging on to the child lock's probably not what he wants for it. But this is hard stuff. It's scary stuff because we all want to obey. We all have the heart to obey. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think there is a fear of people doing something wrong, like coming out of church and coming out of Christianity, the mainstream thought, and realizing, oh, wow, we're supposed to be obeying. You know, what is it we're really... For me, it was the Sabbath day. Why wasn't I keeping the Sabbath day? It's one of the 10 commandments. How come I missed that my whole life? How come I didn't understand, whatever. And that's what kind of got me, like woke me up, so to speak, to reassess the situation. And I was trying to find, where is the line of demarcation between what law is still applicable today and what has changed. You know, when I was in church, that I was like, everybody says, oh, the ceremonial law is done away with. I'm like, where does it say that? And I can never pinpoint where, you know. And so like this discussion that we're having with the book of the covenant versus the book of the law, and what's in the Ark of the Covenant versus what's on the outside of it, like these kind of things I never knew anything about. I didn't realize that there was something different before the golden calf, or different after the golden calf, I should say. So I didn't have that comprehension. Well, now I'm understanding that better. And the problem that I see a lot in Christianity is that they're so afraid of the law and being put under the law because they don't want to nullify what Jesus did, and they don't want to, you know, trample the blood, you know, like they're afraid of it. And so they just toss it out, you know, like we don't need it anymore. And they don't understand that it is to tutor. It has a purpose. We are to learn from it. And when we learn from it, you know, we mature, and then we don't, it's like the child locks. It's to teach us. Once we learn the lessons, okay, you can take the child locks off, but now you understand why the child locks were there in the first place. Now you have that understanding and you can carry forward. What was happening, at least in my experience growing up, is that I didn't understand why the Levitical law was put away. I didn't understand. Obviously, I didn't understand it, because what was I doing all my life? I was celebrating Christmas and Easter, and I, you know, was worshiping this man God, you know, and I didn't have the tools at my disposal to understand the breaking of the first four commandments, because I believe I was breaking the first four commandments in misidentifying who Jesus was, and what his, you know, and all the practices that I was doing in the worshiping in the manner of the nations around me. Like I was doing all of that unknowing what I was doing. I thought I was doing good and whatnot. Anyway, my point is that I don't feel like I was properly instructed in what Torah, or even the Levitical law. I didn't have, I never looked at it before. So then, once I recognized, okay, the Sabbath, I need to go back and revisit this. And I've been learning. Now I have understanding. Now I can see why. You know what, the Levitical law, I can kind of see something that I start to look like a Christian now more, because I'm not doing the Hebrew roots things that we all kind of went through. But people aren't realizing the changes that are going on inside of me. I'm not like your average Christian because I have understanding. I've learned certain lessons that other Christians may not have learned. Okay, anyway, I'm sorry. That was really, I didn't mean to go so long. But I think that's what the problem is. People are afraid, and the law, they don't want to touch it, but they don't understand that we're supposed to learn from it. Okay, I'm stopping.
Well, it's like Christianity put the Sabbath keeping in the cabinet and put the child lock on and said, you can't take it off. And we finally were prompted to take that off. We opened the cabinet and we took the Sabbath out and said, yes, let's obey it. But what happened is somebody else came along and said, oh, you want to obey the Sabbath? This is how you do it. And then they tried to teach us how to start in the evening, light some candles, get some challah bread. And it's like, wait a minute. That's not the Sabbath. That's your Sabbath. But we all we took our zeal to obey, but we were still like children. So we took too much. We didn't understand how to divide it out. And as we peeled off the traditions, when I first started keeping Sabbath, I started in the evening. That's just what I picked up from everybody else. And then it's like, wait a minute, this is nonsense. This doesn't work. And it's just been a progression from that. So obedience is a good thing, but we need to obey what we're supposed to obey, and we need to learn from what we're supposed to learn from, and we need to grow up. And we're just growing up now. This is what we're going through, asking these questions and looking at this tough stuff. And I don't like sounding like a Christian, but I used to mock people that said ceremonial law. I would be like, no, we're all of the law. We're doing all of it. We're obeying all of it. There's no such thing as ceremonial law. And it's like, wow, there really is. I didn't know. It's just a way to phrase it. If you can't really do it now in this version, what if that's all ceremonial law? What if we have no Levites? Who's going to do the ceremony? What can we really do? I'll do whatever I can. I think there is answers for all these things, but it's a spiritual in nature. It's spiritually gleaned. We can't do it in the physical aspect as far as what Torah is, what Moses was saying, but we can do it. Anyway.
I guess really the bottom line to all of this is all the good things that came out of Hebrew roots and everything, even Christianity. Abba's in this, and it's his plan and his thing. And all I have to do is try to obey him and try to get out of the way, so to speak, as far as this ain't right, this is my way. I just have to trust the Father. Just that simple. And I do trust him even to this point, this study today, and it's really brings up a smile inside to see some of the fruits that look back on, and that's not the direction I thought I was going to go, especially first learning Torah. You know what I'm saying? Like you said, all of a sudden cedar or seder, whatever, however they call, all this other stuff that, there's all kinds of, I think, basically, really simple. Abba wants us to listen to him, period. Now, he's going to let me hear other things, but I got to run it through him. And he's going to let me be wrong and stump my toe, and he's going to dust me off, maybe kick me in the arse a few times, say, come on, this is what I've been trying to get you to hear. So it's really about trusting, and I trust. That's all I can do, because I'm capable of being deceived. I know that. I'm not smart enough. I sure ain't smarter than the enemy. I guarantee that. My Father is. So I'm not going to worry about it, and I am going to really count blessings today on this group and what just the direction we're going, the direction I'm learning from, and that's it. That's the bottom line. But anyway, just trust. Thanks.
Yeah. Real quick, I want to share this too. In 1 Corinthians, when you get on past what I read a while ago, and you get into chapter 15, he talks about. He says, he talks about the faith that he delivered to them that they accepted, and the Messiah appeared to these people and those people, and then the 500 more who some are still alive. He said, and after that he appeared to James and then to all the apostles. And last of all, he appeared to me also. Now we know Paul, he was raised up in Judaism. He was like next in line to be like the head guy in Judaism. So he was well learned in that religion. But he refers to himself here in this way. And last of all, he appeared to me also, ignorant and imperfectly trained as I was. For I am the least of the apostles, and I am not worthy to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of Elohim. And so this is a man who, if he had not went on the road to Damascus and had that experience, would probably be a lot different in the eyes of Judaism today. But because of that one thing, they've denounced him. And yet, at the same time, you will hear the same people referred to Abraham as the first Jew when no one in his lifetime ever referred to him as such. So there we go.
Do you have any thoughts, Anson? Thank you, Michael.
No, nothing for now. I'm just taking it all in.
All right, I'm gonna keep reading. Hebrews 7. All right, I'm going to start with verse 15. And yet it is far more evident because he said that another priest would rise after the order of Melchizedek, one who was not appointed after the law of carnal commandments, but after the power of life which abides forever. A key verse here for sure, right along the lines of what we're talking about. What is the law of carnal commandments? This would be 7:16. I don't know what other versions say. I just know what this one. What would the law of carnal commandments be, or what does your translation say there?
I'm thinking this pertains to the Aaronic priesthood.
Why is it called fleshly command?
Well, the way I see it now, like the bigger picture, the Israel that was established earlier on, that was like a physical Israel, where bloodlines and lineage are very important. That's why they have all these genealogies. But after the Messiah, after the work that he did, everything, there was a change. I mean, that was his whole purpose. He came to do something, and that is to restore things back, to the Father. All glory, all everything. To do away probably with fleshly kings, fleshly authorities over us, judges, all that. Now we are in submission to our Heavenly Father, which is not a flesh. And I'm just remembering what Paul was saying about spiritual Israel, which we are all a part of. And the battles are not in the flesh, but principalities. And so there's a spiritual thing, a spiritual reality that's going on that we are now more aware of, simply because we have the Ruach, which leads us into all truth. So I know it's kind of airy-fairy, but like we have our spiritual eyes open and we can see things that most people cannot. So, and Torah, I remember Paul saying Torah is spiritual. The instructions are spiritual because it comes from a spiritual being, which is our Heavenly Father. So no flesh can really understand it, not even desire to obey it. And that was how we were when we were still in our flesh. We did not want to obey it, really. But being born from above, having the set apart spirit, that changes everything. So now we struggle, flesh and spirit. Like our spirit wants to obey, but our flesh sometimes we still struggle, and therefore we are commanded to overcome. So I'm thinking like the fleshly command would be, the physical things that they had to do, the child lock, right? These are very physical. But after that, you remove the child lock. Now you have a command. Okay, don't go out the door because it's dangerous for you. You have to ask permission from mom and dad. Even without the child lock, the child knows that he or she can do it, can go out, but he won't, because it's like there's a commandment. Like it's not a physical thing anymore. You can't see it, but they understand it. The principle behind it, the spirit behind that commandment, something like that.
That's a good comment. Thank you, Kay. I think the author is saying, I think you agree with the author. I think you guys are on the same page. I think if you read 15 and 16, the priest, after the order of Melchizedek, is not the one appointed after the law of carnal commandments, but after the power of life, which abides forever. So the priesthood of the Melchizedek, the priesthood after the order of Melchizedek, brings the power of life and abides forever. It's an everlasting priesthood. I think that's what the author is saying. And yes, it brings life to those in it. Hey, Niels. Shabbat Shalom. We're Hebrews 7, verse 16. For he testified concerning him, thou art a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. That's Psalm 110. For the change which took place in the former law was made on the account of its weakness and because it had become useless. Antinomian. Got to throw the book out. It's talking against the law here. The former law was made on account of its weakness and because it had become useless. This is during the second temple period. They still had the temple up and running. They still had the daily sacrifices. They had the morning and evening offerings. They had all of it. They had the Day of Atonement. They didn't have the Ark of the Covenant in there, but they still some kind of ceremonial Day of Atonement. So this is pretty hard. Either you have to accept this or you have to throw out the book of Hebrews. So this is any thoughts?
I want to make sure that it's not just while the book of Hebrews is being written. I think these verses are addressing the time of David, and this was prior to the temple, prior to Solomon's temple that was built. So him saying all of this stuff is actually he's pointing out that the changes, that this hope, for the law made nothing perfect. At that point, it was understood that the law, the Levitical order and the priesthood was not perfecting things. It was, look in the days of when Samuel was born, the days of Eli and his wicked, his priests, his sons that served as priests after him, they were wicked, and the household of Eli was cut off. So the priesthood wasn't working. The keeping of the sacrifices, there was problems even back then. So, but there was a hope at that point with this psalm being brought forward that, there is going to be one, after, made a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. And that was lasting. So again, I understand that these words are being are being spoken in the day of Yeshua while the second temple was still standing. But those who had ears to hear at that time, you know, would have understood that he's preaching to people who understand that this is coming out of David's mouth. Okay, I'll stop.
Hey, something that came to mind. I was reading something that Jermaine told me to check out, but while I was reading it, other things stand out to me. And I'm in Ezekiel chapter 36. And the reason that I think this is important for what we're talking about is we're talking about the change in the law, right? And there's a lot of people who say, well, no, we got to, there is no spiritual Israel. We got to be Israel, and that's Israel. Well, listen to what the Father said to Ezekiel. He says in verse 16, or just before it, he says, let's see, moreover, the word of Yahuwah came to me, saying, Son of man, when the house of Israel dwelt in their own land, they defiled it by their evil ways and by their doings. Their way was before me like the uncleanness of a menstruous woman. Wherefore I poured out my fury upon them for the blood which they had shed in the land, and for the idols with which they had polluted it. And I scattered them among the nations, and dispersed them through the countries. According to their ways and according to their doings, I judged them. So, why do we want to be that? Why? What reason will we have to want to be that? Not about the physical people. It's not about the lesson that we learned today in these scriptures, in these verses. And I could keep on and on and on, but it says the same stuff. It's countless times in scriptures the Father points out that those people who were in Israel, who are called Israelites physically, did not do the right thing. They never did. So there has to be something else. And this is all, and this isn't making what we're saying and discussing here, and this is for the sake of anybody who might listen to this, is we're not saying that there is something else now the other thing never was. There has been other things throughout the whole scriptures, but we can actually see evidence of what we're discussing throughout scriptures. And sometimes people try to make a case, and you have to force it. But with this, you kind of have to force it not to be. You have to force it not to be. And so what people have to do is they have to get rid of Paul. They have to get rid of Hebrews. They have to get rid of the whole New Testament. And then they have to have Ezekiel and other books out of order in order to support the doctrinal claim that we call Judaism. And then Christianity does the opposite. They get rid of the whole front half, the whole 75% before the New Testament, and they use the New Testament. And I'm not saying everybody, but so then they make the verses in there mean something different. But when you look at the two together, it really paints. I think it paints the picture that we're talking about today.
Yes, you're right about Ezekiel being out of order, and Jeremiah is a big one too. And that is a big job to sort all that out. But yeah, it's been rearranged, definitely. That's a good point. What I was wanting to say about this, the reason I was talking about in Yeshua's day, this is just prior to the temple destruction. And if the order of the Levites was becoming obsolete way back when, how much more so after 70 AD? What priesthood would have survived 70 AD? Only the one after the order of Melchizedek, the one that abides forever. The abiding priesthood would be the Melchizedek priesthood. The Aaronic priesthood is not abiding. We do not have it for 2,000 years now. So I think it's important to understand this was before the destruction, and then understand what happened at the destruction. It's hard to argue against the book of Hebrews if you just look at where we're at. If you take an honest take of the contemporary times, the Israel over there is not the one, like Michael's saying. That's not the one. What do we have? We have the Spirit that was poured out, and we have an abiding priesthood. So we got to find out what that is, and we got to plug into that. It's not about being Hebrew roots. It's about being the roots of life and truth and love. The Levitical priesthood didn't do that. Never was intended for that. It never accomplished that. It just can't do that. So anyway.
I asked a question in the chat. This is something that I heard very often in the Hebrew Roots movement. Why would, because based on verse 18 where it says, for there is indeed a setting aside of the former command because of its weakness and unprofitableness. Why would Father give his people commands that are weak and unprofitable? Have you heard of this question?
Where's that verse at?
Verse 18.
I can answer that. I can answer that quickly. But go ahead, Michael.
No, can you repeat it, Kay? Because Tremaine didn't hear you. She's in the other room.
For there is indeed a setting aside of the former command because of its weakness and unprofitableness. And I look up the word unprofitable, it's of no advantage.
Go ahead, Ty.
The whole process, it's like having to stand in the corner or putting on the dunce cap. The whole process, they didn't learn the lesson. Going through a futile process time and time again, it didn't profit them. It was supposed to teach them. Rivers of blood, they had to dig trenches from the altar to channel away the blood. All of these animals, all these innocent animals dying constantly. They made a whole big to-do out of it. They made a profitable business out of it. Instead of seeing how horrible it was and seeing how useless it was, they embraced it and refused to let go of it. That's the unprofitableness of all of that. And in the second temple, they had to be honest with themselves. The Day of Atonement was nullified because they didn't have the Ark of Covenant in there. It never was what they couldn't do it. They couldn't even do it then, much less now. It led to nothing. And instead of learning that, they made a thing out of it, and this is our thing. This is our thing, and we have the keys to the kingdom now. And it's what all religious people do. They didn't learn the lesson. That's why it was unprofitable. Anyway, sorry.
Well, okay. Oh, Hebrews 7:18. Let me look at that now, because I have an opinion on that also, but I want to look at it right here. So I'm going to go up. So one who was not appointed after the law of carnal commandments, but after the power of life, which abides forever. For he testified concerning him, thou art a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. For the change which took place in the former law was made on account of its weakness and because it had become useless. So kind of, I might be saying the same thing Ty said, but what it says here, for the law made nothing perfect, but there was come in its place a better hope by which we draw near to Elohim. And he confirmed it for us by oath. So this is in the Young's literal, and it reads a little different. So it says, you said verse 18. Verse 18 says, for the change which took place in the former law was made on the account of its weakness and because it had become useless. It had become useless. So that indicates to me that it was not useless or imperfect from the beginning of it, but it had become useless because at some point when you're learning, you have to be willing to get the lesson out of the thing that's teaching you and move on from it. But the people did not do that. Instead, they made that thing their Elohim. And they guarded and protected that thing instead of the principle that that thing was to employ. So it was made useless. At least that's my understanding of that. I could be wrong, but that's what I see.
The law was a teacher and they didn't learn the lesson. You might as well throw out the workbook because you didn't learn your lesson. And my time is up. I'm turning it over to Gary. Thank you all. Shabbat shalom. Thanks for the great comments today, y'all.
Shishi.
Yeah, if anybody has any parting words on this section on Hebrews, otherwise we can end the recording. Oh, here comes Tremaine.
Shabbat shalom. I just wanted to say one thing that when y'all were ending the words, the thing that came to mind to me is that they worship the creation instead of the creator. And that's over and over and over again that's been occurring.